All right, here we go. We're starting. Welcome to the Ways and Means Committee, everyone. We're glad to have you here today. We have 10 bills that we today for the hearing on election law and some property tax issues. We're going to start with the two property tax bills and then move on to election law. We're glad you're all here to join us today in this opportunity to testify before the government on issues that you care about. And we will begin with a bill from Delegate Al Carr, House Bill 158. Welcome, Delegate Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. I'm Delegate Al Carr. It's good to be here with you this afternoon to present House Bill 158 on the topic of the homeowners tax credit. Homeowners tax credit is a program that helps Marylanders by giving them a break on their property tax bill. And it's administered by the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. There was an audit by the Office of Legislative Audits, report issued in October. And in that report, it discussed the method of calculating the homeowner's property tax credit. So in 2020 and going forward, the State Department of Assessments and Taxation is calculating the homeowner's tax credit in a different way than they had in the past. In the past, they had subtracted unrelated local tax credits, resulting in a less generous tax credit for the applicants. But in 2020, they stopped the practice of subtracting those unrelated tax credits, resulting in a more generous tax credit. The audit report talked about the issue of refunds. If the new method, which began in 2020, is the correct method, then in 2019 and 2018, the prior years was perhaps the incorrect method. And there was the question of refunds. Should applicants to the homeowner's tax credit be given, should their homeowner's tax credits be recalculated using the new formula, the new method that SSTAT has adopted for 2020 and beyond? SSTAT has said that they're not willing to do that unless there's legislation. So, and that is House Bill 158. It does two things. Number one, it clarifies and codifies the new method of calculating the homeowner's tax credit to not subtract unrelated local tax credits. And SSTAT's already doing that, but just to make sure that we never have this confusion again, it's codified. And number two, it requires SSTAT to go back 3 years and to recalculate the homeowner's tax credits for people who have applied for them, and they will get the more generous formula. This is not free. Of course, there is a cost to going back and recalculating the homeowner's tax credits. So the bill is written in such a way as to spread this over 6 years so that there's not a big hit to the general fund in any 1 year, but it is a way to make these applicants whole. And I ask for your favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Carr. Next, we have Kevin Canali from MACO.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kevin Canali here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of House Bill 158. You have my written testimony, and I think Delegate Carr did a great job of laying out, excuse me, this bill and what it would do. MACO is very supportive of this bill as it clarifies practice moving forward. We understand that SSTAT has adapted and is now calculating these credits correctly. However, there was a lot of concern, particularly in Montgomery County and Baltimore City, where these were most at issue in terms of calculating the credit of who would be responsible for making these folks whole. A lot of the residents there were upset and were calling, and we think that this is a great way to move forward, and it also properly holds the state accountable for errors made by SSTAT and make sure that they're going back those 3 years and making these folks whole. So again, you have my written testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions, but we strongly support this bill and ask for a favorable report.
Thank you so much. And now for my constituent who's a real expert on property tax issues, Louis Willen.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee, and thanks for welcoming me, Chair, Madam Chair. Earlier my microphone was muted, of course, accidentally. Anyway, thanks for allowing me to testify on this bill. I just want to point out that in the written testimony that I've provided, that you hopefully have access or are able to access easily, there is a copy of the court case, the property tax court case, or I should say tax court case, where the tax court judge used the phrase "property tax imposed," and in there, and those are the words that, in that order, those words solidified SSTAT's longstanding practice of improperly deducting other credits from the homeowner's tax credit. And in that case, the losing taxpayer was an elderly, longtime Montgomery County homeowner. She had no idea that her case would help SSTAT to continue to shortchange low and moderate income taxpayers for years to come. The aggregate loss to those taxpayers is estimated at over $30 million since 2005. And of course, this bill seeks to reimburse, unfortunately, just a fraction of those losses. My written testimony explains why I think this bill deserves a favorable vote. Please also consider my suggestions for amendments in the written testimony that broaden the scope of reimbursement that the bill authorizes. And then in addition, I've included material from the OLA audit, and I ask that you especially take a look at the agency response and the auditor's comment right at the end of that attached material. I really think it would be hard to find a more clear case of a state agency that's unwilling to admit an error that resulted in measurable damages that were invisible to low and moderate income taxpayers. So this bill is an opportunity to show taxpayers that the legislature will right a wrong, even when a state agency is unwilling to do so. And I just will finish by reminding the honorable members of this committee that this bill does not authorize a handout. It simply directs the government to give taxpayers back a fraction of what was illegally taken from them. So thank you for your hopefully favorable vote on HB 158.
Thank you, Mr. Willen, and thank you again for being here today. Are there any questions for Delegate Carr or the panelists? All right, thank you all very much. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 158. To members and those waiting in the waiting room, especially those for the waiting room, once your hearing's done, we will kick you out of the Zoom, but you're free to watch from the YouTube station. And if you're coming back, we will have you back for the next bill. So just FYI for everyone. We're next moving Delegate Stein, House Bill 387.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and committee members. This bill also deals with the homeowner's property tax credit program, but deals with another issue. This past year, I heard from two members of Baltimore County's Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board about homeowners who have endured significant hardship and yet are denied the tax credit because their gross income is more than $60,000, which is the upper limit for eligibility. In some of these situations, the homeowner has withdrawn money from an IRA or a 401k to pay for their medical expenses or those of a family member, only to realize later on that these funds count against gross income and make them ineligible for the property tax credit. And many, if not most of these homeowners are senior citizens. So this bill would set up a hardship exemption for a homeowner whose income is above $60,000. If a homeowner suffered a hardship that is illness, accident, or property casualty related in the previous year, and SSTAT determines that the homeowner incurred expenses that created significant financial distress, the tax credit could be granted. The homeowner would have to document the hardship and the related expenses. I realize this would require SSTAT to determine what constitutes financial distress, but it should be able to come up with a method for doing that. So in this way, through this bill, we would be able to give property tax relief to homeowners of relatively modest means who have suffered a significant hardship in the previous year. And with that, I urge your consideration and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Delegate Stein. Are there any questions for Delegate Stein? Delegate Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Stein, for the bill. I just have one question. In your mind, I know you said SSTAT can come up with his hardship, but what do you think is hardship?
Well, I would, to me, a hardship, a financial hardship would be something that causes, that first of all has to be accident or medical or property casualty related. And then to me has an impact, costs a homeowner at least 25% of their income that year. So to the extent that they have to draw on such resources as their retirement fund, be either their IRA or 401k. So to me, I mean, those are some of the circumstances that would constitute a financial hardship.
And then what did you say was the age requirement? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
What was the age requirement for such a?
No age requirement. I mean, typically, according to the members of the Baltimore County Appeals Board, and I believe one of whom will be testifying, most of these are senior citizens who are facing this situation, but there wouldn't be any age restriction under my bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Barnes. Any other questions for Delegate Stein? Delegate Guyton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Stein. The fiscal note on this is it's very non-specific, and I just wondered if you had any idea how many people we were talking about, any sort of estimate at all of the fiscal ramifications of this. I think it's a great idea, but I don't know if we're talking about a small number or a large number.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know. Perhaps the witnesses that are after me have a better sense as to at least in terms of the number of appeals that they see each year where the homeowner has suffered this type of hardship in terms of the actual number. But I don't. I know that the fiscal note has assumed that if, just for purposes of calculating some impact, that if 1% of homeowners, qualified for this, but I really don't know. If certainly the committee were interested, we could put a cap on the number or make this something that is gradually implemented so that we could see what type of fiscal impact it had. But truth be told, I just don't know.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Delegate Stein. Any other questions for Delegate Stein? All right, thank you very much. We next have testifying Mr. Billy Chase.
Thank you. I'm chairman of the Board of Appeals for Baltimore County. One of the things you have to understand is we have once a month, we get about 25 appeals on the denials, and we have no discretion. That's the most amazing. All these people are appealing to a hearing where we have no discretion. Because exactly, if you have that gross, you can't get it. So I don't want to have these people in front of you in the first place. It puts us in a very awkward situation. A lot of the people we have come in there, they've just retired. They've been working, they've been paying their funds for a certain amount, keep them going so they can retire. And then they have a problem, or like the wife has to go to the hospital or son has to go to the hospital, some kind of medical problem. So they go to their IRA, they put their IRA in and they get denied. They come to us for an appeal to tell us this is a promise. Well, I'm sorry, I have no discretion. This is what you have and this is where it's going to be. And we feel, Ms. Hoffberger and I, sitting in front of them watching these people cry sometimes, we feel this is, first you set them up by having them come to the hearing, knowing there's nothing we can do for that hearing. So we're looking for some means to help these people, some means to bring them back to where they can live on the income that they decided to retire on and use the money that they need to help out from their IRA to help that medical bill or whatever exhausting bill they need. And we don't think that system's in here right now. And that's why Karen and I came up with this idea with Dana to try to get some type of mitigation in this case.
All right, thank you, sir. Ms. Hofberger, Karen Hofberger?
Unmute. Oh, God.
There we go. Better? Can
Yes.
you hear me now?
Yes.
I really do feel, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee, want to thank, first of all, Delegate Stein for sponsoring the bill. And I think that Delegate Stein and Mr. Chase, my chairman, said it very eloquently and very simply. We're stymied by, I think, what was really a glitch, an unintended consequence. And we're talking about people who come into us that are caring for their son who has MS, and the son lives with them, and or the spouse has cancer. I mean, these are, they have the bills with them that can show us, well, we owe this hospital such, or this hospital, or this doctor. It's heart-wrenching. I think that it's something that's easily remedied. And as far as the fiscal note, I will say that I don't think it's that many people. There are other, the 60,000 is a gross, and combined it's 200,000. There's other, you put in place enough, but this little hole that has come through is really painful. And the state person that comes to us and says, well, look, the law is, this is how you calculate it. My hands are tied. And then we look at people and say, and they say, why did we appeal this? And then we say to them, please talk to your delegate or your senator, please talk to AARP. And I think they're so devastated that they just, that's it. So I think it's very simple to please ask for your favorable report on this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Any questions? Delegate Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for your testimony. And I think my good friend Delegate Glyden was trying to understand what the fiscal note would be, because I'm just doing the math, and you said that you guys are averaging 25, hearing 25 cases per month or whatever. If you times that by the 24 jurisdictions that we have in this state, we're looking at 600 if all 24 of them had the same kinds of incidents. So just trying to fully understand what the fiscal note would be. Delegate Stein, would this be a local bill, or you're looking to do this statewide?
No, Delegate, this is proposed to be statewide.
Okay.
Can I clarify something? Out of the 25, by the time we're starting the hearings, we have 4 left. They have worked. There's situations where people don't send the right documentation to the state, and the state representative, day before the hearing or the week before the hearing, goes through them all over again and grants about 50% of them right off the bat. So it's not like 25 appeals, but it's like three or four people out of those 25 have that problem.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from members? Thank you, Delegate Stein, and thank you to both the witnesses who showed up today. Appreciate your service, and thanks for testifying on this bill. The next bill we have, we're moving on to election law. Is Delegate Rosenberg here for House Bill 57? I didn't see him coming in. Or the next delegate. I'm still looking for some of those, so we will move to Delegate Lutke with House Bill 156.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 156 is a bill that members of the committee will recall from last year. For the new members of the committee, last year the House passed, but the Senate did not, a bill called the Student Voter Empowerment Act. And that legislation was designed to address a very specific problem which is that we, as a society, don't do a very good job teaching young people how to actually participate in elections. We do a great job teaching them, the branches of government and separation of powers and checks and balances. And it's a rare thing for an educational institution to actually prioritize sitting down and saying to students, look, if you want to register to vote, here's how. If you want to cast your ballot, here's how. And so we wrote about a bill last year that was based on some best practices from some universities in Maryland, including the Maryland Institute of College of Art, University of Maryland College Park, some of our other campuses who've really pioneered new methods of helping students understand the electoral process and engage in it. As I mentioned, that bill passed the House last year. It did not pass the Senate. And in the 8 months we've had to work on it since then, we made a number of changes to it. Most particularly, we expanded the scope of the bill to include not just students, but we started to ask the question of what other populations of voters are there who may experience particular difficulties in casting a ballot. We know students do, particularly students who are living on campus away from maybe where they grew up and have to deal with questions about how to cast a mail-in ballot. I almost said absentee ballot, and Delegate Polakovich Carr would have been very mad at me. A mail-in ballot. So we started asking what other populations have similar challenges, and we ended up looking at a couple and trying to incorporate provisions related to those populations in this bill. So one of the changes we've made in the bill this year is to rename it the Student and Military Voter Empowerment Act, because military voters are one of those groups. Delegate Griffith, who's a legislator, as you know, from Harford County, which has a couple very large military installations, in particular Aberdeen Proving Ground, raised the question of whether there's more we could do to help active duty military service members cast ballots. So over the summer, we sat down with a branch of the Department of Defense called the Federal Voter Assistance Project and asked them exactly that question. We basically said, what can Maryland do better in terms of supporting military service members who want to vote? And they told us the number one thing that Maryland can do is allow electronic submission of what's called the federal postcard application. Maryland does allow a version of electronic voter registration, but it's not through the federal postcard application. It's our own form. The challenge with that is that it kind of undermines the purpose of the federal postcard application, which is for the DoD to be able to go to service members serving overseas anywhere in the world and say, here's the one form you can fill out to register to vote no matter where you're from. And it's important that they be able to do it electronically because we have a lot of service members who are on installations where there may not be a military postal facility nearby. There may not be an embassy or consulate nearby that can get a paper form back to the Maryland Board of Elections in time for a person to register to vote. So one of the major added provisions this year is a provision that would require Maryland to start accepting electronically the federal postcard application for voter registration. As a couple other states have done, we are tying it in order to verify eligibility. We are tying it to the military's common access ID card, which is what they use for people to access top secret facilities and such, which is a model that's been used elsewhere in the country. Another provision that's new this year, you may recall last year, one of the big subjects of debate about the bill was a provision that would have required polling places to be located on campuses over a certain size. And for a host of reasons, that became a very complicated conversation. And, we sort of took a step back and asked, well, is our goal here to force polling places into institutions, or is it to make sure that those institutions have a seat at the table and a voice in the process of determining where polling places are located? So the way we dealt with that issue of polling place location in this year's bill is to require that local boards of elections, as they're going through the process they go through every couple years of redrawing their precinct boundaries and identifying polling places, to require them to consult with large residential facilities in their jurisdiction. And those large residential facilities would include college campuses, but they would also include large military installations that have residential housing on them, like Joint Base Andrews and Pax River. They would also include large senior facilities, like, for example, Leisure World in my district. This is frankly what I think is probably a best practice anyway. It's just asking local boards to consult with these institutions about how to make sure that the residents of those large residential institutions have maximum access to polling places. And with that, I will cut my testimony off. We have a number of folks signed up to testify in support of the bill from many different perspectives. So thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I urge a favorable report once again on this bill.
Thank you, Delegate Lukey. To members, if you have questions, there's a dozen people who are also testifying. But if you have any technical questions, any questions for Delegate Lukey? Delegate Washington, are you putting your hand up? Yes, go ahead.
I am. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was looking for that button. Thank you, Delegate Lukey, for bringing this bill. I, wholeheartedly support it. I wish we could co-sponsor bills nowadays, but it's all good. I want to just ask you a quick question about I think in the bill, it says that you're providing about a 2-hour window for students to be eligible. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the bill as written would mirror the law about employees. As you know, in Maryland right now, an employee is entitled to unpaid leave from work for 2 hours to go vote. So the bill language would provide a student with an excused absence to go vote for a 2-hour window.
Maybe I shouldn't be asking about amendments now, but students, we have students in high school right now that get off the entire day to go vote if they're 18 years old. Would you be open to it being full day if possible?
I would be entirely open to that. I would say for the committee and subcommittee that there is some concern from the academic community about the legislature legislating when students get excused absences from class. They worry about academic freedom, and you'll see that in, I think Mac's testimony mentions it. But personally, I'd be perfectly happy seeing it be a full day.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Washington. Thank you, Delegate Lukey. To those in the waiting room and watching, we will let you in if we see your first and last name that you signed up with. Otherwise, we're not exactly sure who you are. So I may jump through some of this witness list a little bit. So please, everyone in the waiting room, fix that. We'll start with Lauren Wyatt in favor of the bill.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lauren Wyatt. I serve as advocacy lead for Black Girls Vote, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization committed to engaging, educating, and empowering women to activate their voice by using their vote. I'm also a graduate student at the University of Baltimore. First and foremost, I would like to thank Delegate Eric Lukey and Sarah Elfreth for sponsoring this bill and being consistent advocates for Maryland democracy. Thank you for the opportunity to share why this issue is important to myself, Black Girls Vote, and the Maryland electorate. We believe in using the electoral process to improve the quality of life for our families and the collective community. As a state, we must do more to improve youth voter participation, and this bill does exactly that. With registered voters under the age of 29 representing an increasing portion of the American electorate, the Student and Military Voter Empowerment Act targets this demographic. The bill ensures that students and military personnel have the resources and information necessary to register to vote and is designed to increase voter participation and turnout. Maryland is home to many world-class institutions of higher education. It is important that these students on these campuses are able to easily engage in the democratic process. As an organization that has registered over 16,000 voters in Maryland, with multiple collegiate ambassador programs on campuses in Maryland, DC, and North Carolina, the Student and Military Voter Empowerment Act would assist our voter engagement efforts by not only providing student voter education and organizational support, but also transportation. I appreciate that this bill considers that not all college students have access to a car. Let's also keep in mind that it gets dark around 4 p.m. during daylight savings time. This bill creates a safer voting environment. These increased resources will allow students and military personnel to become more aware of the issues and policies that affect them directly, while establishing a habit of voting early on. Although voting is voluntary, its importance and accessibility cannot be overshadowed. Respectfully, I speak on behalf of Black Girls Vote in support of the Student Military Voter Empowerment Act. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Wyatt. We'll call a few others before we take some round of questions. Is Samay Kendra here? Dan Alpert?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. My name is Dan Alpert, and I'm the student body president at the University of Maryland College Park. I'd like to start by thanking Chair Kaiser and all the members of the Ways and Means Committee for the opportunity to share our thoughts on this important bill, as well as Delegates Lutke and Griffith for reintroducing the legislation, which will enable hundreds of thousands of students to have the resources and knowledge to be civically engaged for years to come. It is a fact that the habits students develop during their time in school stay with them long after graduation. Of vital importance is the lifelong habit of civic engagement, which starts by making it easier for students to be engaged while still enrolled. At a campus as active as ours, there is no shortage of opportunities to volunteer, take action, and get involved. But when it comes to voting, college students face barriers that don't exist for other populations, resulting in a lack of access to the plethora of opportunities at hand. This bill would expand access by mandating a full-time staff member at each of our institutions who is dedicated to student voting and who will help students navigate unique complexities. Students must find time to vote, figure out how to register, decide whether to register at home or at school, and they must inform themselves on the candidates and ballot initiatives. Currently, these responsibilities are shared by the student government's Director of Civic Engagement and a university staff member, both of whom have responsibilities outside the work they do for civic education. This past election cycle, we saw incredible demand from departments across campus asking for help in implementing their own voting initiatives. A full-time coordinator would significantly help bring these efforts together from across campus, provide questions to voting questions, and implementing civic education and curricula across our campus. One of the most frequent questions posed to our team ahead of the 2020 election was how to vote in the fastest and most convenient manner. With chaotic schedules and usually no means of transportation, voting is a significant time commitment for students. While the voting process will no doubt change as a result of this past election, voting early or by mail still presents major challenges such as those I mentioned before. A 2-hour excused absence is a simple solution that opens up the opportunity for those with multiple courses, internships, and jobs to make their voices heard, and align students and faculty with faculty and staff who already have 2 hours to vote on election day. If our goal is to expand access to the ballot box, then there's no better way to empower student voters than by enacting the policies prescribed in this bill. These changes further the commitment our state has to college student voter engagement, and we, the Student Government Association at the University of Maryland, urge you to vote yes on the Student and Military Voter Empowerment Act. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to take 2 more students and then we'll do a round of questions. We have Delaney Bluebaugh from Frostburg.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, delegates. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon about this imperative piece of legislation for our student and military personnel voters. I want to give special thanks to Delegate Lukey for introducing this bill to the legislature this session. My name is Delaney Bluebaugh. I'm a junior political science and legal studies double major at Frostburg State University. At FSU, I serve as the Student Affairs Committee Chair of the Student Government, Editor-in-Chief of The Bottom Line, and Co-Chair of the University System of Maryland Civic Engagement Student Leadership Committee, opposite Ms. Lauren Wyatt, who has also testified today. The Student and Military Voter Empowerment Act of 2021 is a comprehensive effort to provide Maryland students and military personnel with resources, information, and avenues for participating and being civically engaged. It is imperative to proper, free, and fair democratic practices that students and men and women in the military across the state have convenient avenues for registering to vote, as well as having easy accesses to resources that help them to participate civically. In my co-chairing role, I had the incredible opportunity to observe firsthand the efforts that students across the university system took part in and made possible in huge efforts to demonstrate to their peers the importance of practicing one's civic duty. However, in this same role, I also experienced firsthand the challenges many leaders faced as a result of a lack of some state policies that backed up our collective mission. In a pre-COVID world, Frostburg State students had 2 places in town within close proximity to campus where they could vote. However, because of the pandemic, the Frostburg community had only 1 polling place for both the community and students this election. While our Office of Civic Engagement was able to coordinate a shuttle service for students on election day, students who wanted to early vote or needed to register ahead of time had to travel nearly 20 minutes from campus to do so. The requirement that local boards of elections include and consult large residential institutional communities in the decision to select polling locations is imperative, I believe, for students like myself across the state. This coordination between government entities and these communities would mitigate significant barriers such as proximity of and transportation to the polls, thus expanding opportunities for individuals to participate and exercise their civic duty. All that to say, with the numerous constraints and challenges we as a population have faced in the last 10 months, and especially during this pivotal election cycle, this legislation has the ability to alleviate some of these limitations and would give so many students just another pathway to implementing and maintaining lifelong civic engagement. I respectfully request a favorable report. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Is Paige Trzkałka here from Towson? And I apologize, I'm fairly certain I didn't pronounce your name correctly.
Unfortunately, she had class and couldn't join us.
Okay, thank you so much. Any questions for this first round of those testifying of these students? Any members? Delegate Wilkins.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I wanted to thank the students who came forward to testify. We always appreciate hearing from students and getting your perspectives. I just wanted to, in your own words, just hear more of your experiences in terms of some of the challenges that you or your fellow classmates have had currently when it comes to being able to vote on campus. I just wanted to dig into that a little deeper. If you can just share that experience.
Any one of the three people who just spoke able to answer that question?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Oh, Lauren, go ahead. I saw you unmuted.
Thank you, Dan. Really fast. In undergrad, which was ages ago for me, my institution provided transportation to the polling location. As a graduate student, I serve as a voter ambassador, and we advocate and get students to participate in voter engagement. And a lot of students were trying to get out of class, were trying to work around their schedule. I know some professors allowed some classes to be canceled and stuff like that, but I know a lot of people were trying to figure out their schedule and were kind of worried about what they were going to do, because if you want to vote absentee, or not absentee, do mail-in voting, and that's your preference. But if you're someone like me that likes to go in and put your ballot in yourself, then you have to worry about your schedule. You have to worry about your classes and how that might negatively impact you.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to go back to some testimony. We have Jacqueline Slade.
Hello. Thank you to the committee and to Delegate Lodkey for sponsoring this legislation. As a resident of Hampstead, Carroll County, I also want to thank Delegates Shoemaker and Rose for representing my district in this committee. I am an 18-year-old, and I just cast my first vote in an election this past June. Engaging in the election was easy for me. I simply registered when I got my learner's permit through the Motor Vehicle Voters Program. However, even at my high school, St. Paul's School for Girls, some of my peers know absolutely nothing about how to vote, where to register, or how old they have to be to register. For this reason, I run an initiative at my school called Vote-Ed, which seeks to educate young people on voting processes and empower them to become civically engaged in our government. In the process of running this initiative, I've had students ask me questions as simple as when Election Day even was. They were completely unaware of how the process worked. I even had a staff member approach me because she did not understand the process of early voting. High schools such as mine pride themselves on educating young leaders who work for a better tomorrow. However, a high school student is more likely to have gotten a perfect score on their AP exam than to actually know how to vote. At Johns Hopkins University, the school I will be attending next year, only 44.8% of students voted in 2018, up from 14.4% in 2014. When an increase in turnout of this kind is celebrated, it is obvious that there's a problem with the system. 100% of students should be voting, and we should make it as easy as possible for them to have their voices heard. When I spoke about my voting initiative to my class, many of them were not aware of how our votes are even processed and counted, and admittedly, I was not aware of how this process worked until I interned at the Carroll County Board of Elections this past fall. This is why the Student and Military Voter Empowerment Act is essential. It ensures that university students have sufficient access to polling places by including them in the population of a precinct, and also requires that each college or student university in Maryland have a student voting coordinator dedicated to developing a plan for their school to increase voter registration and turnout. The League of Women Voters also has noted their support for this bill. Me, as a representative of myself and also as a member of the League of Women Voters, urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Ms. Slade. Again, I'll mention Sameh Kindra, and then Katie Ann White. There you are.
Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the committee. My name is Katie Ann White, Legislative Fellow for Common Cause, Maryland. I'm testifying today in support of House Bill 156, which is the Student and Military Voter Empowerment Act. I would sincerely like to thank Delegate Lukey for introducing this bill. This bill has the potential to positively influence the future of young people in the state of Maryland. For the first time in many of their lives, they'll be seen as a priority. This is so as the bill will not only address, but also ameliorate the several concerns that many have regarding the confusing voting process that currently exists. Should the bill pass, a student coordinator will be assigned on the campus. This is important as students will have access to firsthand knowledge of the voting process and the various ways they can participate in their democracy. Not only will a coordinator be assigned, but a voting plan will also be implemented. This plan will help to increase voter registration. This is so as a more focused approach will be used in educating students, contrary to efforts made in the past. As a recent graduate of the University of Maryland Eastern Shore and an immigrant, I understand the importance and the need to have measures like this in place. When you're confused about a process and you don't have access to information, you're left discouraged and unmotivated to participate. This is true for many students, as noted in a recent brief created by Campus Vote Project. They found that there is an alarming 10.6 decrease in HBCU student voting and a 5.3 decrease in total Black student voting between the years 2012 and 2016. Currently, I just became a new American, and if I was in college at this time, I wouldn't have any idea how to vote. All I would know is that elections is in November. So I believe that this student voting plan will be very good for students. This bill will help to serve to reassure students that their voices matter, them being properly educated on voting matters, and their full participation in our democracy is a priority for our leaders. We urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Ms. White, thank you and congratulations on your
Thank you.
citizenship. Is Mr. Gabal here? Oh, there you are, sir. All right, we need you to unmute before you start talking. There you go. Oh,
Okay, is that it?
you got it.
All right. Madam Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, distinguished members of the House Ways and Means Committee, good afternoon. I'm Patrick Gabal, Vice President and Legislative Director for the Maryland Military Coalition, and we come before you today to support a most vital measure, House Bill 256. Voting responsibility has been a cherished principle of the military since the Civil War. President Lincoln pursued voting rights by the nation's military starting in 1864. It was deeply advanced in World War II by President Roosevelt and has been a viable responsibility since then, with all service branches having a voting education officer at their various installations. The common access card used by both active duty personnel, reservists, and civilian Department of Defense employees, as well as the federal postcard application for those stationed overseas, has eased the capability for military voting. The MMC sees the possibility of polling places on military installations thus making it easier for the assigned members to vote, as well as retirees who may feel more comfortable joining their active service comrades. In closing, the Maryland Military Coalition, which is comprised of 16 active duty and veteran service organizations, along with the American Legion, who both serve nearly 200,000 members throughout our state, request a favorable report on House Bill 156 and applaud Delegate Ludke and Griffin for their compassion and foresight in advancing what New York Governor Cuomo recently called perhaps our most precious freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabao, and thank you again for your service. Any questions for the last three? Jacqueline Slade, Katie Ann White, or Patrick Gabao? Delegate Lasanti?
Thank you. And I'm not sure if my question really is for the sponsor or for the Board of Elections, really. But I want to specifically speak to the concept of using the federal postcard for basically establishing, for lack of a better term, the residency for to register to vote versus a military ID. Understanding that, and I represent a military base. I represent Aberdeen Proving Ground, which of the 11 military installations in Maryland they're all very different, and their component, their makeup of military personnel versus civilian is very, very different. And particularly in the case of Aberdeen Proving Ground, we have 1,000 military active military personnel versus about 22,000 civilian personnel. So I'm curious as to why we wouldn't use the military ID, because that is really our servicemen and women. The federal postcard basically is anyone that is actually employed at the base. So they could live they can live in Baltimore County, they can live in Cecil County, they can live anywhere, and that then establishes their residency at the military installation. So I understand why what the concept of the bill, but I'm curious as to why you would use the access card and not the military ID if what we're trying to do is give voting expanded access to military personnel.
Madam Chair, do you want me to? Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Lukey, please.
Sure. Thank you, Delegate, for the question. So the DOD are actually the ones who suggested to us that we use the Common Access Card, and that's what other states have used in doing this process. So the federal postcard application is just the equivalent of a voter registration application, right? It's just a common form that can be used by military service members, no matter what state they're registered in, to register to vote, right? And then in order to confirm identity for the purposes of electronic registration, the other states that have done this have tied it to the Common Access Card system. So that card is then used to confirm identity. But just like any other person who registers to vote, a person has to register in their place of residency. If they're claiming Maryland as their place of residency or whatever county it is, then that would be cleared through the voter registration application. And just like anybody else who registers to vote, the State Board of Elections does its due diligence on voter registration using, the ERIC system and other systems to make sure we don't have duplicate registrations or anything like that.
But they still could register. They could still, excuse me, they could still register through this. If this bill passes, they could still register then through this process, correct?
A service member who possesses a Common Access Card could register to vote electronically using the federal postcard application. Now, they can do so using the paper version of the federal postcard application already. And in fact, stateside, a lot of service members would just use that, right? The paper version.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Now I'm muted. Thank you, Delegate Lasanti. If there aren't any other questions for this panel, we'll move on. Not really a panel, but move on to the next few in favor and then one unfavorable, but we'll go next to Rishi Shah.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Rishi Shah. I'm an associate with Maryland PIRG, the Maryland Public Interest Research Group, testifying in support of House Bill 156, the Student Military Voter Empowerment Act. We're a nonprofit public interest advocacy organization that has a student-led chapter at the University of Maryland. I want to thank the committee as well as Chair Kaiser for passing the predecessor to this bill last year, and Delegate Lukey for introducing this bill again. I also do want to spend some time and highlight all of the incredible student leaders that are doing not just testifying on this bill, but also doing great student voter registration work on their campuses. Some have class and you'll see their written testimony, and you've already heard from some of them today. To be brief, Maryland PIRG has worked to register to vote students on college campuses for decades. Most recently in 2020, we worked to register thousands of students at the University of Maryland campus in advance of the election, as well as throughout the state. We found that most students do want to vote and intend on voting if you help walk them through the system. However, without this guidance, students often struggle to navigate an overly complicated voter registration system. You've heard some of the examples today. I'll highlight a few more. Sometimes students don't update their registration if they move from dorm to apartment, and maybe that apartment is only 2 blocks away, but it's in a completely different district. Sometimes they don't know if they'll lose their scholarship if they live in a different state and then they register to vote in their new state. They might not have ever been taught how to request an absentee ballot. I certainly didn't learn how in my high school civics class. And the coronavirus crisis really did make these challenges a lot larger. A lot of students who are out of state weren't able to register to vote in Maryland online because you need a Maryland state ID that out of state students don't have. A lot of students we worked with weren't sure where they should request their absentee ballot to because dorms are closing down. They weren't sure if they would be in their dorm or they would be back home when everything was closing down. And as Mr. Caballo said, military personnel who are frequently moving around from state to state also face similar challenges. And all of these instances may seem small, but taken as a whole, when you hear all of the testimony from the student leaders and everyone else today, these challenges really do place a barrier on voting participation and voter registration, especially for students. And this has a serious impact both in the short term and long term. Numerous studies show that voter registration is habit forming. If a young person registers to vote and vote successfully, they're more likely to do so in the future. So this sort of legislation is really important for voter participation in our democracy, not just now, but also in the long term as we go forward. We really do need to make sure that young voters, whether they're students or in the military, have the tools necessary in order to register to vote and participate in our elections successfully. Thank you all, and we respectfully request, a favorable report on House Bill 156, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Shah. Lubna Azmi.
Hi, my name is Lubna Azmi. I reside in Baltimore City. I'm a current student at Johns Hopkins University, and I grew up in Anne Arundel County in Lothian. And I just want to start off by thanking Delegate Lutke and Senator Elfreth for the proposal of the Student and Military Voter Empowerment Act. And I just wanted to start off by going into a few stories of some of my friends who have faced trouble voting. They're college-aged folks. One of them is Sammy. He goes to school, he's a college student, and he also works to support his family. And he never learned how to vote. He doesn't really have that much time in the day because he's so focused on providing for his family and providing for his education so that he can get a job after he graduates. And there aren't measures put in place or sufficient measures put in place to help encourage folks like Sammy, for example. Another one of my friends, Daniela, she missed the mail-in ballot deadline, and the day to vote this past November, the polling place was too far away and she wasn't able to go cast her ballot. And these are just some of the stories of folks. There are so many across Maryland that are college-age students or folks that are in the military. And I believe that any measure that we can take to strengthen engagement in our democracy that we should be taking. And this bill is a fantastic bill. I think that it should be passed. As a college student, just like I've said, I've met so many different people who have different reasons, different barriers that have come in their way of them being able to cast their ballot, of them being able to express their voices. And I think that this would be a great measure and including those voices. I just like to thank all the student voters, student ambassadors that have been increasing voter participation, that have been going knocking on doors, talking to students. They're a major reason why this is happening. Black Girls Vote, Maryland PIRG are just a couple to name, but I reside my time and I just really strongly encourage that you guys pass this bill. I think it's very necessary. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. Is Irene Kang here?
Irene's actually one of my peers. She had to leave for class just about 15 minutes ago, but she did send me her testimony and wanted it read, if that is all right with you all.
Unfortunately, we can't do that. We can only have those who are live providing that testimony. Are there any questions for the last two people who offer their oral testimony? If not, we have one person unfavorable on the bill, Diane Waterman. Diana.
Okay. Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Kaiser. My name is Diana Waterman, and also thank you, members of the committee, for your time. This is a new experience for all of us, and I actually think this is working very well. I don't know what you all's experience have been, but so far so good. I'm president of the Maryland Federation of Republican Women. I'm representing our more than 1,300 members from across the state. We are testifying today in opposition of this bill, but I will start by saying, after listening to your testimony, I was absolutely astounded, especially from the students, at the difficulties and problems that they have experienced on campus. I would have thought that our students were some of our most technological savvy individuals out there and could certainly navigate our online abilities. You can register to vote, you can request an absentee ballot, a mail-in ballot, online, all easy to do. So I'm surprised to hear that. If that is a problem, then perhaps opposition with amendments, which is not one of our options when you testify, might be more like it. The two primary areas of concern that were to our membership is our government, our state, our country all around is suffering huge financial issues because of the pandemic. There are more and more money is having to be spent on helping our citizens as well as our businesses, et cetera. Implementing many of the components of this bill would be costly as far as adding more to the workload and financial responsibilities of not only our learning institutions, but our Board of Elections as well. To that end, we would suggest that while this maybe need to be attended to, it may not need to be attended to in the current financial situation that we find ourselves. Basically, it struck us as this was a solution looking for a problem, but after hearing testimony, there are definite problems. So if we could ask for oppose or unfavorable with amendments, we would. The bill as it currently stands, we do not believe is the best use of the resources and addressing all the problems that the problems that are there could be handled in other ways. So with all respect, the members of the Maryland Federation of Republican Women oppose HB 156 and ask for an unfavorable report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Waterman. Ms. Waterman, any questions for Ms. Waterman? If not, thank you all very much, and thank you to all of you who spoke on this bill. We're now done with House Bill 156. We are, to everyone who's listening in, out of order, been waiting for some members to join us. We are joined now by Delegate Harry Bandari, who has House Bill 211.
Good afternoon, Chairman Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and esteemed members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm here to present a rather very simple bill, HB 211, Election Law, Early Voting Centers, Days of Operation, which seeks to extend early voting in our state from 8 days to 10 days. You have my written testimony, so I won't be redundant or use up too much time in oral testimony. But essentially, our state is behind when it comes to early voting. By the time early voting in Maryland began, approximately 50 million people had already had their votes. around the country. Since it began in Maryland, the number of Maryland residents who have utilized early voting has grown rapidly, doubling since 2012. There is always a lot of talk about making Election Day a national holiday to help drive turnout. But making Election Day a holiday would not help retail workers or restaurant employees or any number of similar industries. The best way to guarantee access to the polls is to extend the allowable time for early voting. As you see in my written testimony, our state constitution allows for 10 days of early voting. And this legislation simply seeks to utilize all 10 days. I believe it will help cut down on wait times while providing more equitable access to the polls. As it stands, Maryland lags behind most of the nation in early voting, including by some states that are often viewed as being more restrictive with voting rights. At the same time, some of these states, including Tennessee, 15 days of early voting, Indiana, 28 days, and Texas, 13 days allow for lengthier periods of early voting. I think there is a larger discussion to be had about extending it further, but doing so would require a constitutional amendment and is much a larger task. But extending to 10 days is a great start and would put us more in line with the majority of the nation. Voting is the lifeblood of a democracy, and as legislators, it is incumbent upon us to do all we can to ensure equitable access to the polls. For most, the only way their votes ends up being heard is via elections. And we should do everything in our power to help those voices be heard. This legislation would help us to do just that, and I urge this committee to look favorably upon it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delegate Bandari. Any questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you, Delegate Bandari. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 211. We're still waiting for Delegate Rosenberg for House Bill 57, so we will go on to Delegate Lehman's bill, House Bill 341.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to be here. Chair Kaiser and Vice Chair Washington and committee members.
To present a rather
to ask
bill.
your
Whoever is talking, please unmute whoever else that is.
Which seeks to.
I did it. Anyway, sorry, Delegate Lehman.
That's okay. Thank you. So I'm here today to ask for your support of House Bill 341. That would be to authorize local boards of elections to begin canvassing mail-in ballots 14 days out before Election Day and to report those results to the State Board of Election after the close of polls on Election Day. So why do we need this bill? Currently under Maryland law, canvassing of mail-in ballots does not begin until the Wednesday after Election Day, which could significantly delay the State Board of Elections' ability to tabulate and release those results in a timely manner as vote-in mailing is expected to grow in popularity. So the bill does three basic things. It authorizes local boards of elections to begin that canvassing process of mail-in ballots 14 days out, as I said. It requires that mail-in ballot tabulation be reported to the state board after the polls have closed on Election Day. And it also, very importantly, provides for a very strong criminal penalty if someone is proven to have released those mail-in ballot results prior to Election Day. That person would be guilty of a felony and subject to imprisonment for possibly up to 2 years. Now, I am pleased that the State Board of Elections has reviewed the bill and made, to me, 3 recommendations that I think will make this bill even stronger. You should have those amendments, Madam Chair. I hope that you do. The first one would be to require local boards of elections to communicate to voters via email or US mail that their mail-in ballot has been received. Now, local boards of elections did this last year. They did that on their own. But the suggestion to me was that we codify the system of communication in law. People found it very helpful to be told by their local board, your ballot has been received. They weren't anxious anymore. They didn't think, do I need to go vote provisionally, et cetera. And then the third recommendation was that current law says right now that the first, the change would be to say that the first ballot to be received and canvassed will be the one and only ballot that will be tabulated. Under current law, if a person votes by mail and later votes in person by provisional ballot, both ballots are discarded. So in closing, Madam Chair, I am pleased that the Maryland Association of Elections Officials supports this bill. And again, I ask for your favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for Delegate Lehman? Delegate Wilkins.
Hi, Delegate Lehman. Thank you so much for bringing this bill. This is absolutely something we should be looking at after the last election. I just wanted to get a sense. So this was, of course, something that was necessary for at least the 2020 general because of the high mail-in volume that we had. Is this bill anticipating that we'll continue to have a high amount of mail-in ballots? And also, I heard 2 out of the 3 of the recommendations from SBE that the confirmation that ballots are received, the first ballot would be received and canvassed. And can you say again the third one, please?
Right. So the 3 are that to codify the notification, to say that the first the first vote that is about that is received and canvassed is the only one that counts. And then the third one is, as the bill was drafted, Mr. Demarinis, who I see is here with us, was concerned. It sounded like that it implied that those results by local boards of elections would have to begin being reported to the state the morning of election day. And he did not think that was realistic. He was concerned that that would create problems for local boards of elections. So those 3 changes have been presented. You should have received them as amendments. As to how much mail-in voting is expected to increase, it's probably hard to say, but I think that, once the rules were clarified, that people, I think by and large, felt pretty good about it. And I would welcome Mr. Demarinis commenting on that, if that's okay, if they are anticipating a certain percentage growth-wise for example, for next year, which is an election year.
Mr. Demarinis, did you want to address that?
I don't. I guess mail-in voting was extremely popular in the 2020 election. With our briefing, that over 50% of the people did utilize mail-in voting for the last election. Normally, it's in the 5 to 6% range. So, with the popularity of it, most likely would increase up a little bit higher. Just like as time people started to utilize early voting, and the numbers steadily increased as well when from election to election.
Thank you, Mr. Demarinis. Any other questions for Delegate Lehman? Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. First person testifying, we have Cecilia Plant. Are you here? I don't see you. I'll take the next person, David Garis. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Hello. My name is David Garris. I'm the president of the Maryland Association of Election Officials. Thank you for allowing me to speak. The state of Maryland is unique in that we are actually the only state that doesn't count our absentee or our mail-in ballots before Election Day. The other 49 states have kind of figured out how to do this. The 2020 election was the first time where we opened and tabulated the ballots before Election Day. The local boards found this very, a change that we can manage, and we think it's a change whose time has come. So we encourage a favorable review of this bill. In the 2020 election, The state of Maryland counted 1.5 million mail-in ballots, by far the most we've ever counted before. So it's something that we've tested. It's something that we've proven will work, that can work. We submitted some written testimony. Hopefully everyone has a copy of that. Our suggestion is actually to increase the number of days before election day when we can begin opening the ballots. I think the bill says something like 13 or 14 days. We encourage making that 18 days. We think the increase in the timeline will certainly help. As Jared mentioned, we anticipate that mail-in voting, the popularity of mail-in voting is here to stay. It's kind of like early voting, where once the cat's out of the bag, people are going to find it's a convenient alternative to voting. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to speak. And once again, we hope you have a favorable view of this legislation. We think that it's very manageable from the local perspective, and we encourage you to adopt it from the local boards.
Mr. Ayers, I do see our other proponent here, but I did want to ask you a question. I believe you mentioned that 1.5 million Marylanders use the mail-in ballots. Did the 24 jurisdictions find any problems with those ballots?
About problems meaning?
Any fraud, any
No fraud.
None. Thank you so
No.
much, Mr. Garris. I appreciate you and the other 23 jurisdictions and the election officials. Ms. Plant, you'd like to testify?
Yes. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman and Vice Chair and members of the committee. I am the co-chair of the Maryland Legislative Coalition. My name is Cecilia Plant, and our coalition is an association of activists and groups around the state. We have over 30,000 members, and we are basically citizen lobbyists, and we support what we believe is positive legislation in the state. And we are very much in support of this bill. We believe that it's that voting by mail is the thing that is going to be our new way to vote, not just because of what has happened during the pandemic, but because a lot of people do have issues trying to get out to a polling place. Not just time off of work or school, which there are other bills addressing, but also people that have mobility problems, transportation problems. When we looked at the last election cycle, a lot of people filled out mail-in ballots for the very first time. And our coalition heard a lot from our members about the issues that they had trying to get through the instructions and get it in the mail. And then the real fear that somehow they'd done something wrong and their ballot wouldn't be canceled. And people asking all the time, do you know if the ballots have been counted yet? Should I go ahead and plan to go to the polling places? So one of the things that we like about this bill is it will allow the Board of Elections to canvass 14 days earlier than Election Day. And we think that this is important because voters do want to know if their ballot has been accepted, and they wanted to make sure before voting is over. So this will help them understand what is going on. And also, I think all of us hated waiting after Election Day for the states that didn't canvass early, to figure out who won. And I think that this will really give people more peace of mind. I think it will help us make the whole voting process seem much more transparent and much easier to people. And we do believe, though, that the downside of an early canvass is that the results should not be known before all of the voting has been done, so that it doesn't impact the vote for the people that are still trying to vote. And this bill does address that concern. And we believe that it is a very good bill, and we would love to see a favorable report in committee.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Plant. Any questions? All right. Thank you. We next have unfavorable on the bill, Diana Waterman.
Sorry, just hit the printer right as you called me. Again, thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, again, for the opportunity to testify. Again, I am speaking as president of the Maryland Federation of Republican Women and on behalf of more than 1,300 members across the state. While the sponsor of the bill and the proponents of the bill have made very good points about presenting our vote tallies in a much faster way, other states doing this. One of the things that we as Republican activists have always been involved in is poll watching, and during not only during election days, but during the absentee canvasses, provisional canvasses, and so forth. Every vote as it is being reviewed and processed by our Board of Elections members should have members of both parties represented watching these proceedings to make sure that everything is going on properly and according to the law. By canvassing our absentee ballots ahead of election day, even with the penalties as stated in this bill, we believe this just presents greater opportunity for some of the results to be leaked, even if it's not this number of votes, but a general feel for how things are going, overhearing conversations, anything along those lines. We additionally believe that this is going to be even greater impact of work on our local Board of Elections, who had trouble finding, as I understand it, had trouble finding election judges to work and people to canvass all the additional days that we had in the past elections, but adding 14 more days would have even more workers that are going to need to be brought in, more workers that are going to need to be paid and taken care of, as well as all the observers that are going to have to come through on the volunteer side. For these reasons, we believe that this bill should have an unfavorable report, and humbly request that report. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Waterman. I do have a question for you.
Yes.
If there's a lot of processing of the absentee ballots, or really any ballots before they actually get scanned through the machine, if those mail-in ballots if the ballots were opened and removed and all the processing happened besides the counting, would that alleviate your concerns?
It would certainly go a long way to that. I mean, there would be a general sense of what it is, but there would be no way for massive amounts of information to be leaked.
All right, stay tuned. There's another bill coming in a few weeks that addresses that.
Okay, thank you.
And any other questions for Ms. Waterman? All right, thank you so much. Seeing no other questions, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 341. To members, we're next going to Delegate Ruth's bill and then Delegate Rosenberg. Delegate Ruth, House Bill 355.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Delegate Sheila Ruth. I'm presenting HB 355. Maryland law provides petitioners access to be able to collect signatures and put on the ballot local ballot questions, independent candidates, and other parties. Traditionally, the way this is done is by going door to door or going to farmers markets with papers and collecting signatures. During the pandemic, this became a public health emergency, and it was not safe to do that. So the State Board of Elections enacted SBE Policy 2020-01, which temporarily allowed signatures for ballot petitions to be collected electronically. This was done through a third-party app approved by the SBE. The end result of that app was still a list of paper signatures going to the State Board of Elections that they still would verify using their normal processes. And Mr. Jared Demarinis is here also, and I'm sure he can answer any questions about that as well. And there are, in the written testimony, there are screenshots that show how the app works, and you can look and see how that works. So HB 355 would direct the State Board of Elections to adopt regulations to codify this collection of electronic signatures. It gives the SBE latitude to determine how to best do that. We're not asking for a new system to be developed. We're not asking for new processes. We're only asking for this temporary policy, which has also been extended several times temporarily, to become a permanent policy. We've learned a lot of lessons during the pandemic, and this is one of them, that, it's 2021 and we don't need to have the petitioner and the petition signer in the same place at the same time in order to be able to exercise their right under Maryland law to sign a petition. And because the petitioners are collecting personal data and comparing it to voter registration data, some reasonable security precautions should be taken. And so this bill also directs the FBE to develop requirements for secure storage and use of voter data, not just for the petitions, but really for anyone who's using this sensitive information. It should be protected. Finally, there is precedent in Maryland case law for electronic collection of signatures. There was a case, Whitley versus Maryland State Board of Elections, which found that signatures obtained through internet site did not violate constitutional and statutory affidavit requirements. And so with that, I request a favorable report for House Bill 355. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Ruth. Any questions? Seeing no questions, we'll move on to Andy Ellis, speaking in favor.
Good afternoon. My name is Andy Ellis, and I'm a former co-chair of the Maryland Green Party and a current member of the State Coordinating Council. Thank you to Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and every member of the committee for the opportunity to testify on this bill, HB 355. Thank you to Delegate Ruth for sponsoring. I'm urging a favorable report on this and hope that the legislator can make permanent the very common sense innovations the State Board of Elections has approved this year. In April of 2020, when the pandemic had shut down all activity in the state of Maryland, the Maryland Green Party and several other organizations appealed to the State Board of Elections to allow electronic collection of petition signatures, and the State Board approved that policy in SBE Regulation 2020-01. My written testimony, which you should have available, focuses on how we went about developing the software used to collect these signatures, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that. But for my oral testimony today, I want to provide a glimpse into the process of collecting those signatures. Unlike the change.org or do-gooder or contact your representative petitions that I'm sure you and your inboxes are very familiar with, collecting signatures for official Board of Elections petitions is never an easy process, whether it's in person or online. People who sign must be registered voters. They must provide information exactly as it appears on their voter registration, and the form asks them to provide sensitive information like their date of birth. In person, people often write people often write sloppy or inadvertently provide incomplete, out-of-date, or mismatched information, and this causes 20 to 40% of signatures collected to be rejected by the state and local boards of election. The online process pre-screened for these things, and our experience was that about 1 in 3 people that tried to sign the petition had their information rejected by the software because it was not an exact match with the state board data file. One key distinction here is that the software rejects these and not the state or local board staff. In the electronic system, the vast majority of signatures that end up in the state and local boards are already valid or have already been checked against the state board database and thus have a far lower rejection rate. Now, online, between the middle of May and the beginning of August, the Green Party this year collected 1,500 about signatures. About 5 to 10% of those were duplicates of what we had collected on paper, and we averaged about 21 signatures per day online and about 30 a day in person when we were able to collect at farmers markets and other such places. One big takeaway for us was that online petitioning will probably never replace in-person petitioning, but that it does allow Marylanders who, for one reason or another, cannot be in the same place at the same time as a person with a petition. They can utilize their right as a registered voter to sign a petition. In-person petitioning requires voters to be in the same place, the same time. You have to be at the farmer's market the same day as somebody with a petition, and this digital signatures allow every Marylander with internet access to sign anytime they want. Like many things that have been introduced during COVID, it's a common sense innovation that expands access.
Ellis, can you please stop reading and just wrap up? 3 minutes have gone.
Yep, sorry. I urge a favorable report on this common sense innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Sukitra Balahandran.
Thank you. I'm Suchitra Balachandran. I'm on the state board of Our Revolution Maryland and on the steering committee of Our Revolution Prince George's. You already have our written testimony in support of this legislation. So let me just make one point from that testimony. And that is, I want to share my own experience on an attempt by local activists in Prince George's County to place a charter amendment question on the ballot. The issue was started by a group of citizens. They were new activists in the south of the county. Some of us who'd been activists for a lot longer helped the group find its feet, but they were the ones who drove the effort, which started around August of 2019 and took off in November of 2019, which was around the time of a series of municipal elections in the county. So the plan was to gather, they gathered at the polls, they got signatures, and the plan was then to resume signature gathering in the spring when the weather got warmer, but that's when everything came to a grinding halt with the state of emergency and could not stick to the original plan of getting signatures in person. I just want to say it took a while for us to actually know the state board had instituted this policy to collect signatures electronically, but when we did get to know that, we were able to then spend some time trying to figure out how to make this happen. And many thanks to Mr. Ellis for helping us in this effort. I know we were not the only group that they helped. So electronic petition signatures started being gathered roughly around the end of May. And there was an early August deadline to have 10,000 signatures in. And I wanted to say that the group did not get to that deadline by August. So the question was not placed on the ballot. Of the three groups we know that collected signatures to put charter amendment questions on the ballot, only one group succeeded and two did not. Roughly half the signatures that our group obtained was through paper signatures and the other half was electronic. And as Mr. Ellis pointed out, it didn't really go any faster when we did electronic signature gathering versus paper, but it definitely was an access issue and will continue to be an access issue. So I think electronic signatures, as everybody has said, allows for flexibility in gathering signatures and allows more signers to find and support the signature gathering effort, but it by no means makes signature gathering a trivial effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is Miss Antoine here? Joanne Antoine? I don't think I saw you. Just wanted to double check. Do we have any questions for either of the two people who testified on this bill? If not, thank you both very much for coming in today and being a part of this democratic process. We're now done with the hearing on House Bill 355. We're going to go back to House Bill 57 of Delegate Rosenberg. And then after that, we have three additional bills. House Bill 57, Delegate Rosenberg. Delegate, just waiting for you to unmute your phone.
Am I unmuted? Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members of the committee, we can learn from, as this committee has during the past hour and a half or whatever it may be, that there are things we did out of necessity this past election because of the pandemic that should be made permanent, should be made part of our statutes. And there are also things we can learn from the court case regarding the legislation that this committee passed and then the full legislature regarding false information on the internet. I would also add that I have submitted amendments to my bill, which were not made available until 2:30. My fault for, I made the request on Monday morning. They were a little too complicated, but if they are not in the committee's possession now, they will soon be. So I'm going to speak to the bill as introduced as well as the bill as it would be amended. First two provisions that I'm going to speak to, I'm not seeking to amend. They would require that the local board attempt to contact a voter who did not submit a signature with the absentee or mail ballot. This would codify a regulation from this past year. With regard to ballot drop boxes, impose same prohibitions on recording a voter voting, as is now the case for inside polling, the normal voting situation. There would be an exception for security reasons for the ballot drop boxes, obvious because they were outside for an extended period of time, and there is a need in that circumstance. My amendments would address the following aspects of our election law. Instead of, as in the bill is introduced, it would extend for an additional day the deadline for an absentee ballot or a mail ballot to be received. Instead, by amendment, would eliminate that, but require that when the board sends its notice to voters about absentee ballots or mail ballots, that there be voters be informed that if there is a drop off, if you mail your ballot after the last pickup time on that box on the day of the election, that you are going to miss the deadline and not be counted. That is, if the box says the last pickup is at 4 o'clock and you get there after then, you would have been informed when you got your mail ballot application that your ballot's not likely to be counted. With regard to polling centers, the bill as introduced has language from the John Lewis Voting Rights Act amendments, the legislation HR 1, and I believe now also Senate Bill 1 in the Congress. I came to conclude that's not designed for the problems we have in Maryland. That's designed for more serious problems. So what the amendment would do is provide that the state board can order an additional center be opened in a jurisdiction, additional polling center be opened, if the board finds that the failure to do so would constitute discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, or disability. I was made aware of this situation in St. Mary's County this past year, where the board did not have the authority to require that an additional center be open, whereas the votes might have been there to do that if they had the authority to do that. Thirdly, and with regard to the amendments, and I just from listening in, I know there are another bill that deals with this issue, but the language that I'm proposing would require that the local board begin canvassing after a certain amount of early ballots, absentee ballots, or mail ballots are received. That amount to be determined by the state board, not a specific number in the statute, in the legislation that or the amendment that I'm proposing. And then finally, with regard to misinformation online, I would require that this provision of the bill would require that anonymous foreign political communications and false communications regarding voting requirements, putting the holders of the websites with 50 million or more unique monthly American visitors be required to take action with such communications. Print and electronic press would be excluded from the bill as they have certain First Amendment protections that were the basis for the court finding our legislation from 2 or 3 years ago to be unconstitutional. And so this would not apply to websites of print or electronic press. So this committee has done a stellar job over the years in making Maryland a leader in terms of access to the ballot when other states are going in the wrong direction and limiting access to the ballot. We have both enhanced access to the ballot and protected the integrity of that ballot. And I would propose that this legislation, as introduced and as it would be amended, goes further in that regard and is worthy of serious consideration as this bill or in whatever vehicle there is that the committee chooses for continuing our efforts in this regard. Appreciate your serious consideration and thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Rosenberg. Any questions for Delegate Rosenberg? All right, thank you so much. We have a few people signed up to testify in opposition to the bill. We'll start with Diana Waterman.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of the committee, once again for this opportunity. I must say thank you, Delegate Rosenberg, for your amendments. One of your amendments addressed one of our areas of greatest concern in the Maryland Federation of Republican Women, and that was extending the date that by which ballots could be postmarked, which to us was just completely and totally unacceptable, that just because you couldn't follow the rules, you should get a special exception. But we hardly agree with your change to your amendment to include the verbiage of if you miss the latest pickup deadline, your ballot will not be counted on time. So thank you for that. Additionally, we found problems with the part about determining where for minority communities and where the polling location should be. And I kind of got lost a little bit in your second amendment. I think that was your second amendment that you put forth on that. But bottom line, that we in the Federation believe that all voters should have the same, be faced with the same rules and regulations in determining polling locations, that all voters' rights should be equally protected. And then finally, on the last part about the websites and misinformation and so forth, fundamentally, we all believe that the truth should be out there, but that we have discovered that there are many, many sources of bad news, bad information, and would say that it is not necessarily the job of this institution, this group, this body, to be able to determine what is misleading and what is not misleading. On top of everything, a little bit caveat emptor, buyer beware kind of thing. So to all of those, for those reasons, we still would humbly request an unfavorable report on this legislation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Waterman. Ella Ennis?
Hello. Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and the members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm Ella Ennis. I live in Calvert County, Maryland, and I opposed the bill, House Bill 57, and my most strong objection was the provision to allow a ballot to be postmarked after Election Day. I'm glad to hear that there is to be an amendment, but I think that's very important that we have a uniform time for people to vote, and the end of the election is on Election Day. The second thing is that I feel like that this provision in here that deals with the bureaucrat, with the citing of precincts or eliminating them or joining them was very unequal in its treatment to the citizens. Every citizen ought to be treated the same, and that all communities should be treated the same. So I think it's very important in your consideration of this bill that not happen. And I find myself, because I can't judge all of it just by hearing about this amendment, I'm still opposed to this bill, and I urge you to give it an unfavorable report.
Thank you, Ms. Ennis. Ms. Hodges, D. Hodges?
Hi, thank you for taking my testimony. I also am pleased about an amendment to the bill that we not allow ballots to be postmarked after the election. And I believe I want that amendment to pass. I mean, I accept this in some ways if that amendment passes. Secondly, we are all Americans. If we can legally vote, we are all Americans and should be treated similarly. Therefore, I do not think that separating out certain precincts with certain minorities is a correct thing to do. It is also causes a lot of legal problems. If the minority, say, is a Spanish-speaking minority, then you may have to have judges that speak Spanish, although there are abilities and regular precincts for that. And I would suggest that not have both judges from both parties in these special precincts. And again, we are all Americans, so we should be able to vote in a similar way as Americans. Finally, if the laws seem unfair to many people who vote, specifically the bills with massive mail-in voting, we have seen, we saw that in October. What we see presently, if I get a bill, I paid a bill yesterday that was due that day. I sent the check in on December the 23rd. So the mail is still running behind. And I don't know if that could be fixed with mail-in voting. I think it's very dangerous. We should avoid mail-in voting except for specific reasons to have absentee ballots. Being an absentee voter was a simple thing. When I went away to college, I was an absentee voter. So I suggest again that if the laws are deemed unfair, and if the vote could be an unfair vote, then I suggest that you vote against this bill.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hodges. Any questions for these three ladies? All right, thank you. Seeing no questions, we have, to everyone watching, we have 3 additional bills. The next bill on the list was Delegate Cardin's, but he's not available yet. So we're going to take both of Delegate Ivy's bills. But his first bill is jointly assigned with Judiciary, and one of those members is not available right now. So we're going to switch that order. We're going to take House Bill 153, then House Bill 53, and then House Bill 274. So Delegate Ivy, House Bill 153.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And for the record, Delegate Julian Ivy here presenting House Bill 153. As drafted, this piece of legislation would send a ballot to every registered voter across the state for primary and general elections, just like we did in the primary election in 2020. And similarly to the way that we ran things in the November election as well. There are so many different organizations here to voice their support on this piece of legislation. But I think we as a committee, we're all watching. We've had briefings and things of that nature of how our election process took place. And I think that we should continue sending these ballots to individuals. It increased turnout from individuals who don't always participate. And I think that it's always a good thing to get more people to participate, to lower the thresholds to allow people access to the ballot. I know that there's another piece of legislation that is nearly identical that my office mate, Delegate Cardin, is also putting forward. The bills as written are not identical. My piece of legislation is in need of an amendment, which has been drafted and will be sent to the committee. And what it does is just clarify that this is not prohibiting the State Board of Elections or local boards to allow for in-person voting. It was an oversight as we were going through the drafting process, but the amendment will be in your emails soon. Just clarifying the fact that we're looking to send ballots to every registered voter across the state and allow them to also participate in person if they'd like to, and having procedures set up similarly to our primary and general elections for what happens if you already received a mail-in ballot but would like to participate in person. And with that, I ask for a favorable report on House Bill 153. And I know that there are several individuals here to speak in support of the bill. And Madam Chair, I'd like to let you take it away.
All right. Delegate, there's quite a few people who've provided written support, but the only people signed up orally are opposed to the bill. We'll first take Diana Waterman.
Well, again, I promise this is the last time that you have to hear from me today. Again, Madam Chairman, Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you again for this opportunity to testify in front of you again. Once again, just to remind you, I am testifying as my role as president of the Maryland Federation of Republican Women. We have more than 1,300 members across all 24 jurisdictions of our state. I combined my written testimony into 153 and 274 together. I realize I'm only testifying for 153 at the for one of them at the moment. But in general, the members of the Federation strongly impose across the board mail-in ballots that like was done with the primary election, and for multiple reasons. First and foremost, with no blame being laid really at the foot of our Board of Elections, and Jared Demarinis and those people who do an absolutely wonderful job. Our voter rolls are not up to date. Having used our voter rolls as to create walk books and gone door to door, there have been numerous times when you go up to a house and there's 3 different household names, and you knock on the door and you ask to talk to one of them and they say, no, they moved out 6 months ago, and you ask to talk to another one, no, they lived here before that. So you've got people who have not been removed from the voter rolls because of the rules and regulations that we have to remove people from the voter rolls in having to have mail returned to the Board of Elections. I believe it is 3 times before they will remove them. So you have ballots going to people who don't actually live there anymore. The assumption would be is that everybody would be good law-abiding citizens and would take those empty extra ballots and either do a return to sender or put them in the trash and destroy them because they were not those people. But there does exist the possibility that individuals could take and vote those ballots as the individual whose name is on the ballot. Furthermore, when the mailman sticks your mail into your mailbox, while it is federal offense to tamper with the mail that doesn't belong to you, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen or it can't happen. And mail ballots, actual ballots could be taken. Additionally, when you have large facilities like apartment buildings or centrally located mailboxes or postal PO boxes, when people pull out their mail, whatever they don't want goes into the recycling bin, again, presents the opportunity, not saying it will happen, but the opportunity for ballots to be taken and ballot voted by people who don't actually own that ballot. For all of these reasons, we object to a cross-the-board mail-in ballot. What we did in the general election with the Board of Elections mailing out absentee ballot applications or mail-in ballot applications, we don't have a problem with that. However, you can get that absentee ballot through online or through your local Board of Elections. More that I can go into, but I can see my time's running out. So with that, I will conclude and request a unfavorable report on this legislation, please. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Waterman. I believe up next is Ella Ennis.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Ella Ennis. I live in Calvert County. I am a past chairman of the Republican Central Committee here in Calvert County. Served on the committee for 10 years, so I've had a good bit of interaction with elections and voting. And first, I want to say that there's been several references to how popular mail-in balloting was in the 2020 election. It wasn't that it was so popular, but it was that people's opportunity to vote in person was greatly restricted. We only had 5 precincts, we had 5 voting places instead of 23 for people to vote. People voted by absentee ballot because their ability to vote in person was severely restricted, and that should not happen again. I object very much in this bill to the idea that you would mail ballots to all registered voters. The voting lists are not updated regularly. You have people who have moved or who have died or who have, for other reasons, are not eligible to vote again. And that particularly in communities where you have multifamily housing, you have people move more often. It would be more likely that ballots might be in the trash can or be taken out of a mailbox. And so the security of the ballot is therefore impaired, and that when a person goes to the polling place on election day, they have complete privacy in being able to cast their vote. Nobody pressures them. They mark their ballot themselves. They put it in the collator. They know it's been counted. It gives them confidence in the results of the election. And when you have mail-in ballots where you can have ballot harvesting, where you have people come and perhaps pressure elderly people or very young voters who are inexperienced and try to get them to let them help them mark their ballot or to fill out that ballot and return it. It definitely compromises the security of the ballot. And people want to know their results on election night. And when you depend on mail-in balloting that's going to take days and days and days to count, then you undermine the confidence in the results of the election by the delays. And the other problem that I think you have to be concerned about is that that you want to have poll watchers there to watch and observe the vote counting. And if you string this out by mail-in ballot and have it over many days, then you make that impossible for volunteers to do that because it's too many days. So we have been having in-person voting for 100 years or more, and it has worked very well. There's no reason to replace it with mail-in balloting, especially when you consider how slow the mail has been.
Mr. Ennis, if you can summarize for me, I'm sorry.
I asked for an unfavorable report.
Thank you so much. Greg Decker, please.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Greg Decker from Gaithersburg. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on House Bill 153 and 274. You know, with the pandemic, I certainly understand we had a need last year to encourage and facilitate absentee voting here in Maryland and of course across the country. What I hope we learned is that because the process requires a break in the custody of the ballots and a very labor-intensive process, there's an opportunity for what we say irregularities, and more importantly, there's an opportunity for the appearance of irregularities, and that results in a lack of confidence. This reduced lack of confidence, or this reduced confidence in our vote results, is I think it really threatens our democracy. I think I'm very afraid of that. And then to go further and say we're going to mail out ballots to everyone, that's very troubling for me because you know, anyone who's been out canvassing voters in their neighborhood, they know about the inaccuracies that we see, and many times we see that people that are on the list no longer live there. These voter rolls need to be cleaned up. That is a problem. But that problem becomes a travesty if we use those rolls to send out ballots. Mailing out ballots to everybody listed on the voter rolls, I think is a huge mistake. I think it would present the opportunity for fraud. And if you don't think there's fraud, I think many people will see that there's an appearance of fraud, the possibility of fraud, I should say. And this significantly erodes the confidence that we all have in the process. So I believe it's very important to maintain the confidence in and integrity of our elections, that we don't mail out ballots to everybody on the, I think it's a tremendous mistake. So I speak very unfavorably to House Bill 153 and 274, and I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Decker. D. Hodges. Ms. Hodges?
Oh, yes. Thank you. I had a phone call at the same time. Anyway, I am very opposed to this mail-in balloting being sent to every registered voter. We know that the voter lists are not correct. I have a daughter who lives in California. They have all mail-in balloting. they receive every election ballots for people that they've never heard of, but who may have once lived there and may have once lived in California. I want to point out also that when I have been out there visiting, I have talked to a number of people, just a number of people, who basically no longer vote. Why? Because they don't believe their vote counts. They believe mail-in voting is a fixed process, or the results are fixed. When you have that kind of a belief in elections, it's very damaging to the state and to freedom. I don't want to repeat everything everybody else said, but we know that we know what happened with mail-in balloting, and that often the votes didn't come in for a long, long time. And as I said before, even now, it's a problem with paying my own bills, which tend to arrive 3 weeks after they're mailed. So with that, I thank you. And for those reasons, I oppose mail-in voting.
Thank you, Ms. Hodges. Members, are there any questions? I see to Delegate Patterson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the bill. My question is really for Mr. Damaris. Mr. Demarinis.
I'm sorry, my real name is almost like Jared's.
It's for Jared. It's for Jared, please.
All right.
It's more a question that is a culmination of comments that have been heard. What can be done to dispel those persons who continually insist that there are irregularities or there is fraudulent activities, etc., in the voting process? As a sworn member of the Board of Elections, what can be done to dispel or to counter these types of comments?
For the record, Jared Demarinis, Director of Candidacy and Campaign Finance for the Maryland State Board of Elections. First, the voter registration rolls. Mary Wagner and her team performs list maintenance, in accordance with federal and state law. Maryland is a part of the ERIC program, which then takes more data from more states to make sure that our rolls are as up to date as possible. And so the list maintenance is being performed to make sure that these rolls are as good as they can be, as well as getting other data from health sources as well, to make sure that anybody who has died is then removed from the rolls in the list maintenance program. At the end of the election, we perform an audit on all the results. If there's double voters, those double voters are sent over to the state prosecutor's office for prosecution. So, they're aware of it. And so, the entire process is open and transparent for everyone to see. And it's, been operational, and the lack of fraud is minuscule in elections. And that's been historically proven.
So just for the record, there is no widespread or incidents of irregularities or fraudulent activities. I think that has to be said again and again, because that we offer clear, definitive information to the citizens. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Delegate Patterson. Delegate Lasante.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Delegate Ivey, for bringing this important bill. The issue that we've talked about really gets down to confidence in the election process. And I think we all agree that our citizens having that confidence is the bedrock of our democracy. So let me be really specific about the difference between verifying the eligibility of a voter in person versus the eligibility of a voter when a ballot comes in by mail. So maybe the question may be to you, Mr. Damaris, I'm not sure, because it's really a technical process. So when a voter shows up on election day in person, how do you validate that that is in fact a person that is qualified or able to vote, versus you receive a ballot in the mail and that person in effect is again qualified and able to vote? Because I think that that's where we get into this question of, you know, is there a greater ability for fraud and all of this kind of stuff? Do we in fact have processes in place to validate voters in both of those situations?
So if you go in person, you just state your name, and then the election judge checks you in, looking at, you know, finding your name in the electronic poll book, and then you go and get your ballot and you vote. With the mail-in ballot process, you request the ballot and it's sent to the address that you wish. There is an oath on the envelope out there that you sign under the penalties of perjury, and that there is a signature that you have to fill out, and then you mail that mail-in ballot back into the local boards, or you can now use a Dropbox that is out there. Those ballots then are checked in to the process there, verifying that, you know, the person that requested it we have received it. Emails were sent out to individuals saying that your ballot was on the way, and that we have received your ballot. And then we also have on the website later on, you know, that it was, you know, processed as well. So, you know, all that entire, you know, is transparent for the voter to see out there, and to make sure that there's any problems that they can contact the state or local boards at any point there. But those are the check-in processes there.
So the oath that's on the mail-in ballot, as I read this proposed bill from Delegate Ivy, that wouldn't change, correct? You would still have that
Right.
oath?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Delegate Lasante. Delegate Shoemaker. You're on mute, sir.
Sorry. Thank you. Jared, I can tell you anecdotally that a good friend of mine got an application for his daughter to vote by mail in the last election. And unfortunately, I mean, she had not lived in the state of Maryland for at least 15 years. So, I mean, that's the sort of thing that I would point to anecdotally as causing concern for a number of folks, stories like that. And a lot of people have similar experiences. Another thing I'd like for you to address, I mean, there's no way, is there, as we sit here today, to authenticate the signatures on these mail-in ballots, is there? Jared?
Well, that's not required by law.
Okay.
I mean, the process, you know, we implemented the process as required by Maryland law in order to, you know, to count the ballots.
Okay. All right. But since there's no mechanism in the law in place, there's no authentication that occurs, right?
We do not do signature verification in the state of Maryland.
All right. Thanks, Jared.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Delegate Shoemaker and Delegate Lasante. If you both can take your raised hand down, that'd be greatly appreciated. Are there any other questions for this group or panel? Seeing none, thank you all so much for coming in today. We appreciate your testimony. Next bill, House Bill 53, Delegate Ivy. This bill is jointly assigned with Judiciary, and I believe that Delegate Bartlett, Delegate Moon, and Delegate Stein are here. So Delegate Ivy, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, again, for the record, Delegate Julian Ivy here presenting House Bill 53. Under current state law, a person who has been convicted of a felony, and is currently incarcerated is not qualified to be a registered voter. This legislation, as introduced, would
I'm
build
gonna
off.
go drop these bills, Molly.
Delegate Shoemaker, if you can mute your screen, please.
Oh, sorry.
Not a problem, sir. This legislation, as introduced, would build off the progress made by the General Assembly in 2016 by allowing individuals currently incarcerated for felony to participate in our elections. Now, why should we let currently incarcerated felons participate? Democracy empowers each of us both individually and collectively. We get to participate in the decision-making of our society. We get to document our perspectives and beliefs. We're allowed to have a voice in and to work towards bringing positive change to our communities. Our American democracy in action is one of the most inspirational aspects of our country, even though it's often overshadowed by our economic prowess as a nation. Our democracy inspired a little boy with a funny name to believe that he indeed could serve as our president. It inspired a little girl to believe that she could indeed also serve as our president. What heights could democracy inspire these incarcerated individuals to reach? By passing this bill, Maryland would be joining DC, Vermont, and Maine in not rescinding the right to vote to an individual due to their incarceration status. By allowing incarcerated individuals to participate in the electoral process, we are reaffirming our beliefs in the power of democracy. I'm asking for a favorable report on House Bill 53. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate Ivey and his bill? Members of Judiciary, are there any questions? Seeing none. The first person in favor of this bill, Kimberly Haven. I don't see her. Ms. Haven? No. Zanabi Chaudhry. I know I messed your name up, but Ms. Chaudhry.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify in strong support of House Bill 53. My name is Zainab Chaudhry, and I'm here to testify on behalf of the Council on American Islamic Relations. According to the Sentencing Project, felony disenfranchisement laws block millions of Americans from voting because of a felony conviction. Currently in Maryland, inmates awaiting trial or those convicted of misdemeanors may vote, but convicted felons are not allowed to do so while serving out their sentences. CARE strongly supports this measure to extend voting rights to imprisoned felons for several reasons. Civic participation reduces recidivism and ultimately improves public safety. It gives a sense of agency and builds self-worth and gives inmates the opportunity to exercise autonomy. Last July, Washington, D.C. lawmakers voted to allow felons to vote while in prison, joining Maine and Vermont expanding this right to such an extent to those who are incarcerated. Elections are the fundamental backbone of a democratic society. The ability to vote in our country is what separates us from autocracies and dictatorships. Stripping convicted felons serving out their sentence of the right to vote isolates and silences their voices when we need their perspective in order to bring about substantial change. Inmates who have the opportunity to vote have the incentive to feel empowered. They are more likely to have successful reentry upon their release, and it gives them a chance to voice their concerns regarding the criminal justice system, which they have experienced themselves firsthand. We support this bill because it protects voter rights. It restores a measure of dignity and self-worth amongst a silenced population, and it ultimately helps to promote public safety. Therefore, we respectfully urge your vote in favor of it, and we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you so much. Charlie Cooper, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I really appreciate your making this electronic access available to those of us in the public. So our group, Get Money Out, we're all volunteers, and we're trying to make sure that all citizens have equal access to the ballot and an equal say in governance. And we support this bill very strongly. There's a long tradition of excluding imprisoned felons from voting, but that does not make it fair and just. And the disenfranchisement of felons is tied up with the aftermath of the Civil War, where loopholes in Amendments 13 and 14 were able to be used to imprison many, many African Americans and deny them their voting rights, and also get free labor. And our mentor, Jamie Raskin, has reminded us that in Richardson versus Ramirez, the Supreme Court ruled that the 14th Amendment allows states to disenfranchise felons, but that doesn't mean we have to. So I would endorse the remarks about the redemptive power of having felons vote. I would say that not only the 2 states in DC allow this, but almost 20 other countries in the world allow this, and it doesn't cause a problem. So we can move away from a long ago history of white supremacist suppression of the vote and go forward with something that helps reintegrate people who've made mistakes into our polity and make our polity better for everyone. Please issue a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cooper. Next is Nicole Porter. I don't see that she's here.
I'm here.
Oh, are you there? Okay, very good.
I am.
Ms. Porter.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you so much, Delegate Barnes and Delegate Ivy, for sponsoring and introducing this legislation. I am Nicole Porter with the Sentencing Project, and urge this committee to advance this bill on a favorable report. You have my written testimony, so I'll just offer some brief remarks. I do appreciate the other people who've already spoken in support of House Bill 53. I did want to highlight that, Maryland is to be commended for expanding the franchise to people in the community several years ago on felony probation and parole. The Maryland Assembly expanded the franchise to some 92,000 Marylanders, and that was a huge step forward for democracy in Maryland and across the country. Since then, other states like New Jersey, Colorado, and Nevada have also expanded voting rights to folks in the community, and most significantly Florida and California in the last few years. If House Bill 53 gets adopted, it would certainly be a huge step in the right direction, building off of what the District of Columbia did last year and aligning Maryland with 2 states, Maine and Vermont, as well as the district, and also Puerto Rico, that also allows American citizens the right to vote from prison. So, as has already been mentioned, felony disenfranchisement weakens the political power of communities of color, particularly the Black electorate. Nationally, 39% of people disenfranchised in prisons are African American, whereas Black residents only make up 13% of the nation's population. So this policy does weaken the electorate of Black residents in particular, given the long history that Mr. Cooper referenced earlier. I'll just say that in recent years, other states have introduced similar legislation, and you all may have learned earlier, just yesterday, that lawmakers in Oregon are considering a similar bill to expand voting rights to people in prison. And that builds on previous efforts in states like New Mexico, I mentioned New Jersey earlier, California, and Hawaii that have also worked to expand the franchise to people in prison. So I'll wrap my comments up there. I just want to thank again, Delegate Ivy, for your sponsorship of this legislation and starting this conversation, not just in Maryland, but nationally, and bringing this policy to the states, not just to territories like the district and Puerto Rico, because Maine and Vermont, while those have 2 ideal policies, those states never disenfranchised residents from who were in prison from voting, whereas Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico expanded the franchise to people in prison. So I'll conclude my comments and just ask that this committee advance the legislation with the favorable report. Thank you so much.
Great job. Thank you so much, Ms. Porter. Last speaker for this bill, Crystal Williams.
Thank you and good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Crystal Williams. I'm the Director of the Government Relations Division for the Office of the Public Defender. I'm here today to offer testimony in strong support of House Bill 53. This is a necessary bill that would ensure that incarcerated individuals in Maryland have a voice and the ability to be counted and heard throughout our nation's democracy. Too often, imprisonment is used as a tool to strip the rights and dignity of incarcerated individuals, and less often is a focus on rehabilitation and corrective reform. Not only will voting allow individuals to maintain a connection with their communities during incarceration, which can be instrumental for effective reentry, but expanding the right to vote to incarcerated individuals with felony convictions is a critical civil rights issue that helps shed light on mass disparities that exist within our criminal justice system. Disparities that I see every day as an attorney in the public defender's office here in Maryland. Importantly, this bill would help elevate a highly marginalized and actively suppressed voice of Black men and women who historically lack in presence and representation in our electoral process and across all facets of government. A 2011 Howard Law Journal article written by then Executive Director of the Sentencing Project, Mark Maurer, has long made the argument that felony disenfranchisement policies are inherently undemocratic, no matter how applied, including for persons serving prison sentences. While disenfranchisement policies generally affect people of color disproportionately, this is even more true in regard to disenfranchisement of incarcerated people, since the racial disparities in prison are most extreme within the criminal justice system. Sadly, such extreme racial disparities are no more apparent than here in Maryland, whereby Maryland leads the nation in incarcerating young Black men. Let me say it again, more of Maryland's prison population is Black than in any other state in the nation. A 2019 study by the Justice Policy Institute found that more than 70% of all people in Maryland's prisons, that's double the national average, are Black, a rate that far surpasses the next closest states of Mississippi, South Carolina, and Georgia. As I stated in my previous testimony on H. Bill 222, when hearing and seeing these stark disparities that exist still today, I'm reminded of the considerable amount of time I spent as a young law student years ago studying the history of many disenfranchisement laws across the country. And in doing so, in understanding the history and context of these laws we seek to reform, it is important to acknowledge that there is a direct lineage to many disenfranchisement laws that plague Black and Brown communities to this day, were rooted in a means to actively suppress racial and economic diversity. Whether these laws could be seen to be directly traced to systematic efforts to silence Black voices, or can be seen to have a de facto impact on silencing Black voices, it is up to all of us to make necessary changes to ensure that all voices are represented and heard through our local, state, and federal voting processes. Since the 1990s, a significant movement for felony disenfranchisement reform has emerged around the country, largely spurred by reports finding that an estimated 4.2 million Americans were not eligible to vote as a result of felony disenfranchisement laws. Today, despite laudable efforts of reform over the past couple decades, that number has actually risen to 5.2.
If you can summarize for me.
Yes, to 5.2 million Americans who still cannot vote because of a felony conviction. Over the course of, well, I will say in summary, Maryland is taking necessary steps and critical actions to ensure that access to voting for those previously disenfranchised are being restored. This bill would undoubtedly continue the work that has already begun. Now is the time for Maryland to be a leader, not for having some of the harshest laws and racial disparities in its application of criminal justice, but for it to be an example of positive change and democratic inclusion and protection. And I thank you for your sponsorship of this bill and the work of the committee in efforts to restoring votes for individuals who are incarcerated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Members, are there any questions for this panel? Seeing none, thank you all so much for your testimony today. And Delegate Ivey, thank you for your bill. Members, last bill for today. Delegate Cardin, House Bill 274.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see the committee, and it's good to see some of my members of judiciary here watching the previous bill, which House Bill 53 is an amazing bill, which would do amazing things for what we started a decade ago with increasing the franchise and giving additional voting rights to ex-felons, and now to felons. So I look forward to hoping to have an opportunity to vote on that bill when it comes out. This bill, House Bill 274, is very similar to a bill that you just heard from Delegate Ivey, as he mentioned before. There are some differences, but suffice to say that we both we are on the same suite, so maybe we're drinking the same water, but we both have very similar ideas. And I just want to, since I did listen to the testimony, some of the questions, I wanted to focus on just a couple of issues that I really think are important, because this is vital legislation that could really help improve our ability to make elections convenient, concise, and secure, and open to all legitimate and legal voters in the state of Maryland. There are many arguments for a strong vote by mail system. This is not a vote by mail system. This is simply a system that allows every voter to receive a ballot in the mail. They can choose, based on the legislation that's drafted, they can choose to use it or discard it, shred it, get rid of it, and not use it and vote in person if they wish. As you have already heard today, this is basically an ability to make it more easy, more convenient for everybody to have. What we saw in the primary election, as was already indicated, as well as in many other states, is that more and more people voted legally and appropriately because of this kind of policy. We had an increase even in when there was a COVID and there was all these other issues that we were dealing with. We had an increase of 73,000 votes in the state of Maryland because of this system. And then in the general, when we changed it to opt-in absentee, it didn't, there were all kinds of issues, not to say that that's not a great idea and something that we can consider, but this really does open up the franchise to everyone. Regardless of what issues may arise, whether it's pandemics, whether it's natural disasters, whether it's hurricanes, we want to make sure that the system is conducted fluidly and openly. And we want to, regardless of national, state, or local emergencies. And as we've seen in the past year from the COVID pandemic, there is just no predicting what could happen and what might happen that puts a strain on our ability as a state and individuals' ability to get to the polling place. And that is why I think it's important that we be prepared. And this system has proven to work. Now, many of you asked questions about whether this is going to open up the opportunity for fraud. The fact of the matter is that we all know that there is no indication of any, number one, widespread fraud or even individual fraud. There were a few mistakes where people forgot and voted 2 or 3 times. I think there was 3 times, and maybe Jerry can tell us, I think it was 3 instances in the entire election where somebody voted twice, and it was determined not to be intentional. Furthermore, this will significantly lessen the inconvenience for in-person voting. So if I get my ballot in the mail, I can spend all my time I want sitting at home, figuring out who I want to vote for, preparing my ballot, and then I can go to the polling place, which is what the intent is, and I can just drop this in the ballot box or give it to the election official without any concern about whether it's going to be hijacked in the mail or whether it's not going to be received or whatever. So basically what it's doing is it's making it more efficient to vote in person by doing this. There are arguments about people voting twice. As you've seen, there's no evidence of that. And if we did have any issues with that, I think that the roadblocks and the security that's already in place has proven that that won't happen. In fact, if you know that it's a felony to try to intentionally commit voter fraud and vote twice, I think you're not going to do it just for a single vote or for 2 or 3 votes if you have the opportunity to do that because you went into somebody else's mail, which is a federal offense already, got the ballots and started voting them even though that wasn't you. This does not seek to turn us into a vote by mail state. It just gives everybody the ballot. The last thing I'll say is that when you look at cost, we already send a sample ballot to every single registered voter. Instead of sending them the sample ballot, we just send them the ballot. So it doesn't increase any cost whatsoever. And if we did decide to do some sort of opt-in absentee, that would be an opt-in forever absentee, you're going to have all kinds of issues that we have to work out there, which I'd be happy to talk about. I drafted an amendment to do that if that's something that the committee decided to do. But I would be happy to reflect on some of the issues that I think there are with that kind of legislation as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Cardin. Members, are there any questions for Delegate Cardin? Seeing none, we have 3 persons signed up to testify unfavorable for this bill. We want to start off with Ms. Dana Waterman.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much again, Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'll be brief. You already heard everything I said in reference to the other bill. And all of those issues still exist. Both delegates have reported, as well as Jared, that there is no fraud, but there is still the possibility for fraud as we believe it. As another person testified, that it takes a chain of command or chain of custody, I guess, chain of custody for the ballots and puts it out there where it doesn't have exactly the same level that it does if you walk into a voting polling location and vote, or if you have requested an absentee ballot and they know that they are sending it back to someone who actually wants it and is planning to vote it. We just feel that we already have the mail-in system. We would be amenable and agreeable to, when you send that sample ballot out, send that absentee ballot application like they did with our general election in the last go around, that'll be fine too. But that will be only mail-in ballots. Only ballots will actually mail to people who have requested the ballots, not to the general public. Again, not saying that you guys aren't doing all that you can to make our voter rolls as tight and concise as they are, but I would have to agree with Delegate Shoemaker that I have seen instances firsthand where people who have been out of the state or even dead or whatever the case may be receive ballots. So we are humans. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect system. Why put the ballots out there in the public when we don't have to, when we have other mechanism and means that will work effectively and have worked effectively? And then again, there's the whole mail issue as well. But you guys have had a long day here. I will conclude with the Maryland Federation of Republican Women requests an unfavorable report on this piece of legislation as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for spending a lot of your time with us today, Ms. Waterman.
Thank you for allowing me to.
Yep. Mr. Decker, Greg Decker.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I won't repeat what I said about the previous bill. My objections are very similar. I don't have a problem with facilitating absentee ballots. As Ms. Waterman said, I don't object to us sending out an application for voters to apply for an absentee ballot. I understand some people can't get to the polls. I understand that. But we can't be in a position of sending out ballots to all the people on the voter rolls. And I'm sorry, with all due respect to the State Board of Elections, I've been out canvassing with those voter rolls. I know how accurate they are. And as much as they may try diligently to keep up, there's going to be a lot of ballots that go out there and they're just sitting around, not addressed to anyone in particular who's still there. And that's a problem. And it creates an opportunity. And as I said before, it creates an opportunity for people to lose confidence in the process. So for those reasons, I still object. I think that mailing out ballots to everyone on the voter rolls is a huge mistake. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Decker, for your testimony as well. D. Hodges. Did she leave? Ms. Hodges? I don't see her. I believe she left. Members, are there any questions for this panel? Seeing none, this concludes our testimony hearing for House Bill 274. Thank you all so much for your time. And members, this concludes our hearing for today. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.